Okay, I hope my screen is visible to everybody.
Yes, ma'am. Your
Okay.
screen is visible.
Yeah. So we were discussing about different modalities of model training and the importance of training a model, testing a model, right? And we also discussed that during the validation process, our model is not supposed to learn anything, right? So these understandings are very important because we eventually end up doing these mistakes when we are developing an AI based systems. Then the other concept which is important for us to know is the concept of epochs. So epoch essentially means number of times you are allowing your model to see the training data, right? So which means that suppose I am developing a cat dog classifier and my I have some 100 images in my training data, right? So one epoch is like reading each one of those 100 message images one by one. So one image you are reading, passing it to the model, and model is learning parameters based on that, means weight updation based on that. Then you pick the next image, model is learning weight parameters based on that, pick the third image, and likewise doing for 100 images is one epoch, right? Please keep this concept clear. And then when you are saying 30 epochs, so that means running through those 100 images 30 times, right? So it's like suppose and then you will wonder that why do we do this, why just one time is not enough. So I'll give you a interesting example. Suppose we play that game where you are shown some 50 items and then suddenly that item is taken off and you are asked to write down on notebook, tell us what all items you have seen, and then they call it a memory test. Some people are able to figure out some 20 items and write, some people are able to figure out 5, some are able to figure out 30, right? But imagine that but if you just look at this particular scenario, you will see majority of people are not able to go in double digits, right? So now imagine a scenario when you are showing the items again and again, like you say, okay, you are having problem memorizing, okay, look at these items again. Then again you take off, then you say, okay, look at this item again, and you keep doing this. So obviously if you are showing the items again and again, so every time you develop a different image and you'll say, okay, there was a pen also, there was a eraser also, there was this also, there was that also, and then you have many other items coming up in your mind, right? So that's the importance of epochs, right? That's what you have to understand. But then you should also remember that suppose I keep showing that 100 times to you, so then there is a like it's a stagnant thing, no? Because maybe after the like after showing it for 10 times or for showing it for 20 times, you have almost seen all perceptions and then you don't have anything new to learn. So that means you have to optimize the number of times you want to show, that means the number of epochs that you can have in your model, because each of these things, they come at a price, and price is the resources, GPU resources, which you are using for your model training. So this is an example which shows that if your model is trained for one epoch, the precision or the accuracy may be like 0.57, and when it's trained for 30 epochs, same thing, no change in the model, but being trained for 30 epochs, the precision may reach 98.5%, right? So so that means just by increasing the number of epochs, we are improving the precision of our model. But it also means that suppose there might be scenarios where just increasing the epoch is not changing the precision, right? So that option also you have to be open with. But yes, we have to understand the importance of the number of epochs. So just like you have number of epochs, likewise there are multiple other hyperparameters. These are all termed as hyperparameters, and I had mentioned it initially that hyperparameters are something with which you are initializing your model, right? So you have learning rate, you have decay rate, decay steps, number of epochs, batch size. They are all your hyperparameters. right? And these hyperparameters, there are different meanings. Each one of them will not discuss now, because I am just creating a lot of dots in your mind, and then a connection between these dots, and gradually with time I expect that the connections will become deeper, because you will have a deeper understanding of whatever we are discussing, right? But whatever you are seeing over here, learning rate is again an interesting concept. So learning rate means the speed at which you are allowing your model to learn, right? So that's also termed as the step size. And this will basically eventually control how quickly you are basically allowing your model to converge. Okay, so the other concept that we need to understand is the concept of transfer learning. So transfer learning essentially means inheriting the learned aspects of somebody else, right? For example, when I'm talking to you, I'm using a presentation which has evolved over a period of time, right? This is not my first presentation. So with every learning, or with every addressal of the audience for using AI for a different perspective, I have the presentation has evolved, right? And whatever I am telling you now might be a knowledge that I have gained over many years, right? But because we are connected for next 4 hours, whatever knowledge is possible to be transferred is being transferred, right? So you understand what transfer learning does. So transfer learning essentially gives a capacity by which you can use already trained models as a point by which your next stage of model learning can be extended, right? That's your transfer learning approach. And transfer learning, there can be three major scenarios of transfer learning. One, the big rectangle which you are seeing is the feature extractor of a convolutional neural network, and this is the classifier, the smaller box which you see. So one approach could be that you are just using the model structure which somebody else has developed, and you are retraining the entire model. So that's why you have blue colored thing over here. So that's like retraining the entire model. Second strategy is when you are training some of the layers and leave the others frozen. So here you are frozen means the white colored, and blue means the training part. So we have frozen some of the layers, let's say 50% of the layers, and 50% of the layers are trained, including the classifier. And strategy 3 is when you are freezing the convolutional base, where you are freezing the entire feature extractor, and you are just training the classifier. Now what freezing, you understand, part which is not going to change, right? So that means this is a scenario where we are partially using some of the learned weights, and over that we are adding up. Here we are adding up everything, we are just using the basic structure. And here what we are doing is we are not learning any features, we are just learning the parameters of the classifier. Feature extractor is completely frozen. So these are three different strategies of transfer learning, and these strategies are basically practiced in these four different scenarios, right? First scenario is when you are working with a larger data set, but that data set is different from the pre-trained models data set, right? Then you have to train the entire model. And second scenario is when you are using a larger data set, but that data set is similar to the pre-trained models data set. Then you have to train only some of the layers and leave the others frozen. And vice versa in this case. That means you are working with a smaller data set which is different from the pre-trained models data set. So again you will train some of the layers and leave the others frozen. And fourth scenario is when you have a smaller data set which is similar to the pre-trained models data set. So that means this part will be frozen, the white part, right? White was frozen. So smaller data set, but it's similar to the, so because it's similar, the entire feature extractor will be frozen and only this much part is going to be trained. right? So you understand, when you're using a pre-trained model like AlexNet, GoogleNet, Inception v3, VGG16, VGG19, ResNet, DenseNet, these are all pre-trained models. And repurposing a pre-trained model means, suppose if you have to work on a project, you have to see that, okay, I have to use DenseNet. So why I have to use DenseNet is because DenseNet was trained on a data set like this, and the prime data set that I need to work with, this is its relation with the data set for which DenseNet was trained, right? And accordingly, you pick up a scenario. And then you will ask, okay, how do we distinguish that frozen state and unfrozen state? So for that, in Python, there is an attribute called top, top, and you can go to the right documentation, but this particular attribute can be used at right places. This is like putting a breakpoint in your code, right? So putting this at the right places, so that you are able to control that beyond this, the code is trainable, and before this the code is frozen. And whether you want to freeze or unfreeze will depend upon the true and false value of this particular value, which is top. Okay. So reusing pre-trained network essentially means, first of all, you have to load the pre-trained network. You understand, loading pre-trained network means getting the weights of the pre-trained model. For example, fetching weights of DenseNet model, right? Then replacing some of the layers. How many layers will depend upon what kind of repurposing you want to do, whatever we discussed over here, right? So that decision you have to take. Then you have to train the network, and you have to predict the accuracy, and finally deploy whatever model you have done. So this is what is known as reusing or repurposing of a pre-trained network. Okay, so topics that we have covered till now are all fundamentals of deep learning, how to avoid overfitting, what is overfitting, what are methods of accessing performance, what is parameter search, what is transfer learning. So in totality, we have discussed, of course, deep learning is like a ocean in itself, right? But at least some of the building blocks of deep learning we have understood, so that we can relate it to the application development that we wish to do today. Okay. Okay, now the next concept that we need to again know in terms of model training is the concept of vanishing and exploding gradients. Now I made this image to explain what is vanishing gradients. So this is your input image, right? And this is your neural network, the layers of your neural network. Right now, just forget the red block, okay? And this is your output. Now, if I go to the editable mode, see what happens. So you are reading, your model is reading one image at a time, and it is generating some classification output. This is called forward propagation, right? This is called forward propagation. And second thing is the reverse path. So in reverse path, what you are doing is you are basically spelling mistake. So in the reverse path, what you are doing is you are updating the weights using back propagation, right? This is back propagation. So vanishing gradients means what? That back propagation, you understand, it is using a formulation which is like let me just write here, that formulation is like w old, which is the old weight, is equal to w new, which is the new weight, right? Minus lambda, I'm just writing as L, okay? Partial derivative of error, okay, with respect to the partial derivative of weight. And this is being multiplied by lambda. And what is lambda? Lambda is the learning rate. Okay, so this is how weights are updated. So that means you will take the sorry, I should make this new, and this should be old. So you are taking the older value of the weight and you are subtracting what? You are subtracting basically partial derivative of the error with respect to the weight. ओके एंड ये जो भी रेशियो है दैट यू आर मल्टीप्लाइंग विथ द लर्निंग रेट, और ये जो भी टर्म आता है दैट यू आर सब्ट्रैक्टिंग विथ the older weight that is there, and based on that you are getting the new weight, right? So what happens is this error, what is this error? You know, this error is the difference between the outcome that your forward propagation generates and the outcome which is actually in your data set, right? So that's your error. Suppose you understand, and this is a simple concept. So so it is, so that's the meaning of partial derivative of error. Error is that error which we just discussed with respect to the weight, right? So so what happens is, by using this formulation, what you are trying to do is you are trying to adjust the weight. This is called weight adjustment. So excuse me, you are trying to adjust the weight so that it is able to reduce the error in the next iteration, right? So we are actually trying to reduce the error. So what happens is back propagation goes from the back layers to the front layers. Now in majority of the cases, what happens is most of your weights are adjusted in the backside layers, and by the time you reach the front layers, let's say the weights are adjusted this much, by the time you are reaching the front layers, the weights are almost not updated, right? And this error gets reduced. So that means the front layer, their weights will not be updated in spite of back propagation. So this is known as vanishing gradients. So gradients, they vanish. Gradients is that differential change in the weights. So that is changing, that is vanishing, and change in weight is what is known as learning, right? So if there is no change in weight, that means there is no learning. So vanishing gradients stops the learning of the model. So overall purpose of model training is lost. That means we don't want to have vanishing gradients. We should not have vanishing gradients when we are doing model training, right? So vanishing gradients are a lot of weights becoming zero. Exploding gradients are again a concept by which your weights are increasing in size. So if they are increasing in size, you have to clip the weights, and if they are vanishing, then you have to have a mechanism by which this does not happen very early. Because जैसे आप यहाँ पे देख रहे हो that this has happened after 5 layers, gradually what happens, this goes on increasing. It may happen after 3 layers, it may happen here, it may happen here. So that means because of vanishing gradient, and vanishing gradients will become a bigger problem with increasing number of epochs, right? So because of vanishing gradient, irrespective of making all the effort for model training, your model is actually not learning anything. So many times you will say, people will say, I have done this for so many epochs, but still my model is not learning. There is no change, right? So no change means your gradients have vanished and you are not realizing that. So you should basically take care of those aspects as well. Okay. So the rest part of the discussion would be on developing a computer vision system for smart patient monitoring. So you can just see that remotely the nurse or the doctor is able to monitor the patients by seeing different parameters on their mobile device, right? And for doing this, we need to use various aspects of computer vision, which is classification, object detection, segmentation, right? So some of these aspects we have discussed while I was discussing the previous concepts of the slide, right? So now I will stop this particular presentation, and we will go over to our next presentation for the day, where we will be talking about using all these concepts that we discussed to develop a decision support system for Parkinson's patient. This is the next session that we wanted to conduct. And whatever I'm going to present now was majorly work of my PhD student Bhakti Sonawane. and Dr. Shushant, who is a behavioral therapist at Sain Hospital, Mumbai. So we had a formal collaboration with this university and with this hospital, and they helped us in procurement of the data set of Parkinson's patient, which on which we could apply emotion detection and emotion detection on facial features and audio features. So that was a research where confidentiality and all aspects of the patient had to be maintained. So that is why we have signed ethics committee, we have taken ethics committee clearance for using that particular data set for our research, but they did all this effort for our PhD work. So all our acknowledgements to Sain Hospital and the support that they provided for this particular research. Okay, so but in order to understand what is this decision support system which is used for progression detection of Parkinson's patient, it is important that we understand what is Parkinson's disease basically, and what kind of problems does it create in human body, right? I told you it's a neurogenerative disorder, right? What how does that make it possible for us to use something like emotion detection for testing the progression of this particular disease, right? So that for that part we will first of all discuss some of the complexities and nature of this particular disease. So, as you know, emotion is the basic part of human communication, and emotion can be expressed by speech, gesture, face, or some psychological signals, right? And expression, it's for non-verbal communication. Now, the emotion detection can be used for developing variety, and in fact it's being used for developing variety of applications related to healthcare, e-learning, then artificial social agents, clinical psychology, and psychotherapy, right? And this is the basic structure of human brain. If sometime you get an opportunity, try to read internals of human brain. It's one of the most demystifying experience, right? And you will be surprised to know that how this small segment of our body is actually controlling every motion, everything that we are doing in the body, right? And why it becomes complicated to understand human brain is because every aspect of brain is handling a different kind of behavior or motion altogether, right? For example, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, the cerebrum, the brain stem, which is this part of the brain, right? The temporal lobe, which is this part of the brain, Broca's area, which is this part of the brain, frontal lobe, which is this part of the brain, right? So frontal lobe dementia is a kind of Parkinson plus disease, right? And you can see that if there is a dementia, so that means if there is a degeneration of this particular lobe of human brain, then it leads to changes in movement, problem solving skills of the person, concentration and thinking, behavior, personality, and mood, right? So it affects all these aspects, one single frontal lobe, right? And so Parkinson is basically progressive in nature, right? And it has also become one of the most common neurogenerative disorder after Alzheimer's disease. And just like people just like people were people were discussing about health related complications initially, right? So they were saying that majority of the population will suffer from cardiac problems. So likewise, it is said that the next generation is going to suffer from more of neurogenerative disorders as compared to cardiac problems. In fact, we are not comparing, we are just saying that this is a new branch of problems that is going to affect the next generation. And in Parkinson, the disorder basically includes loss of motor function or increased slowness and rigidity of human body. And some of the cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's are bradykinesia, which usually appears in very early stages of the disease. Bradykinesia is the rigidity of facial muscles, right? Muscle of the face. So then there is a tremor. Tremor means shakiness in the limbs. The next part is postural instability. So you understand, not being able to stand or sit properly, overall posture gets affected. Then there is another variety of Parkinson, which is known as progressive supranuclear palsy, right? So progressive because the disease is progressive, supranuclear because it refers to part of the brain that is affected, and palsy means weakness or paralysis in a part of the body. Right. Now, in case of Parkinson's plus, what the issue with Parkinson plus, that is PSP and PD, is that there is very little work which has been done in the area of Parkinson's plus, right? And this is a disease which is very fast progressing. So a person with Parkinson may live for 20 years, and a person with Parkinson plus may live maximum for 5 to 6 years from the onset of the disease. Right. So it's such a sad thing. And Parkinson plus basically will produce problems in terms of emotional tone of voice, facial expression, or body movements of the person. The facial muscles become rigid, right? So that's why there is a problem in showing emotions. And they also suffer from dysarthria, which is monotony of pitch and loudness, reduced stress. So when they talk to you, it is not going to be a properly understandable speech, right? So they cannot change their pitch, right? So without changing their pitch, communication becomes very difficult for us to interpret. So that is dysarthria. And then the voice also becomes very harsh. So that means there are lots of changes in the voice and facial rigidity as the disease progresses, right? So some of the cardinal manifestation of PSP is pseudo bulbar palsy. These are some of the medical terms, but majorly it is affecting behavioral, cognitive, and gait disturbances of the patient. So you in my first session, I was talking about gait disturbance, right? And gait is basically related to affecting the way in which people walk, right? And people are doing research on assessing the gait disturbance of Parkinson's patient and using that to predict the progression of the disease. Now, see, when I said that in PSP the progression is very fast, that means deterioration is very fast, right? So medication has to be changed very quickly. Okay, every 15 days you will see there is a new change in the body and medicine has to be changed. So that's why sometimes neurologists, they also get confused, and they adjust the medication by trial and error, right? So they'll say that, okay, give 4 doses of this medicine. Then you will say that this is causing so and so type of problem in the body. So they'll say, okay, make it 3, right? Okay, the person has become very slow after making 3, so they'll say, okay, make it 3.5, right? And that is how the dose is adjusted. Okay, so that's these are some of the issues of dealing with PSP. The other problem is frequent falls or impaired postural reflexes. So there are lots of research where people are working on gait disturbance and predicting when the person is going to fall. And these patients, they fall abruptly. That means they are just standing in front of you and suddenly they become imbalanced and they will fall like a stick. And so there is no reason why they have fallen. It is not that they get giddiness, but abruptly their body loses control, they will fall, and next moment they are able to even stand up on their own, right? So there are lots of research where people are trying to work on predicting fall in PSP patients. These are some prospective areas of research that I'm telling you, and this is a disease which is little known, and it's said that 10 million people suffer from this particular disease. So it's neither very common, but it is predicted that the next generation is going to there will be larger number of people suffering with complications of Parkinson as compared to other cardiac related issues, right? So that's why world over people have started putting lot of effort in doing research in the area of neurodegenerative disorders. Excuse me. So so how is the disease basically diagnosed? So based on postural reflexes, or there are many things, but a lot of physiological changes that people are noting in the body before taking an assessment of whether somebody is suffering from this disease or not, right? Now, some of the early symptoms of PSP basically includes, I think we have already discussed, slurring of speech, clumsiness, confusion, basically mild shaking of hands. This may or may not be there, and handwriting. Yes, handwriting is also one aspect that gets very early gets disturbed in such patients, right? So, basic motivation of doing this research was that. PD diagnosis, Parkinson's diagnosis and management is a challenging problem. And that's why, if we are able to provide a kind of decision support system that can be used for automated assessment of these patients, then it can help in identifying the line of treatment or the right dosage of medicine for these patients. Now, because we are talking about development of a decision support system, then or we are talking about progression detection, we have to have some biomarkers which says that how much is too bad. Okay, so for example, we are saying that there is a facial rigidity or rigidity in facial muscles. So you will say when somebody is smiling, the lips should spread this much, but in Parkinson, it spreads only this much, right? So that means there has to be a biomarker which says how much, right? And based on that, you are saying that somebody is on stage 3 or stage 4 or stage 5, right? So there are biomarkers for diagnostic tests, and one of these biomarkers is known as the UPDRS scale, which is Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. And the UPDRS is basically made of these 6 sections, right? So first section is evaluation of the mentation, behavior and mood. Second is self-evaluation of activities like swallowing. Yes, swallowing is also one factor that gets affected, because slurriness in speech means not very clear speech is because the vocal muscles get paralyzed, voice muscles. And because the vocal muscles get paralyzed, the swallowing of these people are also affected, right? So that's also one parameter which I, if you remember, when I was starting, before starting for this session, I told you that Parkinson is the creator of several other diseases, right? It creates several other problems, like handwriting is gone, but they are not able to write anything. Swallowing is disturbed, speech is disturbed. There is a constant salivation where a lot of saliva will come out from their mouth. Moving in the bed becomes a problem. There is a frequent fall. So many problems associated with frontal brain dementia, which is neurodegeneration of the frontal lobe of human brain, right? So so there are different kinds of biomarkers. Now, in UPDRS scale, you will see that, for example, serial number 18 is related to speech. as a part of motor examination skills. So 0 means normal, 1 means slight loss of expression, 2 means monotone, third means marked impairment, fourth is unintelligible. So you understand what are these biomarkers, right? So these biomarkers, they basically tell you the step, right? So a step which helps you in measuring the deterioration in speech, in facial expression, in tremors, in action or postural tremors of hands, hand movement, finger taps, rigidity, and many others. This is 18 and 24. That means there are other uh, bodily symptoms as well. And for each area of the action that you're talking about, there is a biomarker. That means level 0 is this, level 1 is this, level 2 is this. And sometimes what do you mean by normal, that also you have to define, right? So you understand now what are biomarkers. Then there is another one which is known as head and Yar biomarker. So basically, I just wanted to show you these biomarkers. Then Schwab and England activities of daily living scale. 100% means completely independent, 90% is this, 10% means totally dependent, helpless, complete, invalid. 20% nothing alone can be slight help with some course, several severe invalid. 30% is with effort, this. And 0 is a vegetative function. Vegetative function means there is they are now dependent for everything. They are dependent. They cannot even eat their food on their own. So towards the end of Parkinson, they have to be the patient has to be inserted with a food pipe and a pipe in their stomach for feeding as well. So you can, and all this thing is happens gradually, right? So obviously emotion detection and things like that will not help in these phases, but they can help in some aspect of identifying the deterioration in the patient, so that if you are trying to monitor them remotely in the early stages. And yes, one more aspect of this disease, if I tell you, for a very long time these people are dependent, right? And what happens is, in India we have a setup where you have family to support, right? So family size is so big, and you will always find somebody who will dedicatedly come and try and support such people. But in Western countries, there is no concept of large families. They are like small units they live in. So most people who suffer from Parkinson plus, basically, and also being able to identify the progression of the disease, so that so that we are able to take the right medication for helping such people out. Okay. So I think I wanted to give you an idea of the scale. Basically, this is another scale, so you can see withdrawal, irritability, dysphagia. So dysphagia basically means difficulty in swallowing, using knife and fork. So this is with respect to eating habits. So there are different kinds of falls, sleep difficulty, mentation, and things like that, right? So this is another scale. So there are so many such scales actually, right? So what I wanted to tell you is that because this kind of scales are available, so that's why we thought that it will make a sense to go and work towards developing a decision support system for healthcare facility of this Parkinson patient. This is another scale, right? All of them obviously we cannot remember, but I'm just trying to give you an idea that so many different scales are possible, and these scales are something which helps you to, or which helped us to validate our model. right? However, these ratings also had some shortcomings, and shortcomings were in terms of fluctuations in the severity of clinical symptoms and signs during the day, differences in the interview technique, scoring of signs such as dystonia or myclonus requiring expertise to be detected, interpretation of items, the assessment is time consuming. So these are some of the shortcomings or issues related to working or developing this kind of rating scales, right? But the advantage of making a decision support based on these rating scale was that you can simply use a webcam which is for capturing the video of the patient, right? And then apply some machine learning technique on the data which is captured from the webcam. And then what you're doing is you are basically processing that data, and the outcome, whatever is the outcome you have got, that you are comparing against some biomarkers, and then you are saying what is the level of the progression of the disease, so which level the patient is right now. Okay. So now the next question that we need to answer is why we decided to work on using emotion detection, because I just gave you an idea of variety of scopes that we can work with in terms of identifying the progression of Parkinson's disease, so which is the gait movement, speech, swallowing, right, fall, predicting the fall, and many such things. So now why we decided to work on this thing facial emotion is because these Parkinson patients, no, they have a stone face, they develop a stone face. So this is basically image of Tom Haywood, a senator from Texas who died in 2001 from PSP, and he is basically photographed with his family. And the bottom basically says that from the image you can find out that out of these four people, who was Tom Haywood, this guy, because you look at his face, there is a rigidity on his muscles, and it does not mean to show any expression. So it's like just showing a neutral expression on his face, right? And these are some other examples of faces that these people will have. They are all PSP patient images, right? So there are a lot of deep learning models which people have tried to use for emotion detection, but these emotions are, they cannot be categorized into happy, sad, angry, right? Because you look at their faces, it's neutral, right? Can you say they are happy? It doesn't mean they are not happy, right? That's what you have to understand. You will say that basically you will say that they are not happy, that is why they are showing this particular expression. So what we need to understand is just their face, just because their faces are rigid doesn't mean that they are unhappy. They are actually, many of them being happy also will have this expression, right? And this kind of rigidity will increase as the disease progresses. Okay. Right, dyserthia speech, or we already discussed some of the complications of working with people's speech, and especially the speech that is deteriorated for Parkinson's patient, right? So what people typically do when they want to use speech as one of the indicator for checking the progression of the disease is that, suppose there's a paragraph like this. Now I'm talking about how do you capture a data set for training this kind of model, right? So what people will typically do is they will fix a particular paragraph, and suppose if there are 10 Parkinson patients, they will ask all 10 of them to read this passage, right? So now reading passage may become difficult over a period of time. So sometimes, like we spoke to a neurologist and he said that you may not go till you may not go as long as as far as going and telling them to read a particular paragraph, but you can decide on some words. For example, hippopotamus, right? So we were told that if you ask them to spell hippopotamus, then they will not be able to spell this properly. Likewise, Rashtrapati, so you say that you ask them to spell राष्ट्रपति, तो राष्ट्रपति जिस तरीके से वो बोलेंगे, you will be able to feel that they are having problem in their speech, right? So likewise, there are some typical words or phrases which they have identified to test the vocal capacity of these patients, right? So basically, we conclude, based on this, we conclude that a decision support system which is based on facial emotions, and which is based on the speech of these people, can be used for better prognosis, diagnosis, and rehabilitation of Parkinson's patient. Right. So what we did was we basically worked on developing a system which is like this. So you have patient's facial expression and patient's speech signal. From here, we are extracting the features from the facial data, and from here, we are extracting the acoustic feature extraction. Both these features we are feeding into clinical decision support system, which is our combined model. This model also has access to patients feature database of other patients, some global data set, right? This is what we had procured from Sion Hospital, and this is some medical knowledge about PD, that means biomarkers. So that means inputs to the clinical decision support system is some data which we have captured from the hospital, some data which is globally available, both of them augmented together through transfer learning. And this is being connected to medical knowledge, that means the biomarker which is defined for this particular disease, and accordingly coming up with some recommendation on the stage of disease that the person is in currently. Okay, so this is basically a computer, CDSS basically stands for computer based decision support system for Parkinson's patient, right? That's the flow of our model. And for this, there are some data sets which are openly available. One is the KDF data set, then faces data set, Montreal set of facial displays of emotion, Amsterdam dynamic facial expression, which is AD, FES, BIV, and cross DB dataset. And for speech, there is a Torgo database for dysarthric articulation, right? So image dataset for facial expression, and for speech there is a Torgo database, right? And apart from that, so this is something that is globally available. And apart from that, we also got collaborated with LTMMC which is Sion Hospital department, and principal investigator for this data collection was Dr. Sushant Narang. I had referred his name when we started off the lecture. This was followed by an ethics committee approval in January 2019. Then we also took consent. I'm just showing the modality of going ahead with data collection over here because there are privacy issues. So we obtained consent from the participants, and the data collected was basically facial expression videos of patients with Parkinson for 7 basic emotions. So fear, happy, angry, disgust, surprise, sad, and neutral. And the 3 level of videos for happy and sad emotion. And there was also control subjects, that means normal facial expression videos for testing in unconstrained environment, and control subjects normal facial expression images for fine tuning. And for audios we used labial sound phrases like Rashtrapati, hippopotamus, which I told you. So we didn't make them read paragraphs, but we picked up some labial sound phrase in consultation with neurologists, doctors, right? So this is how the data set was collected. And this is okay, so this is basically list of the people, like data set was collected from 14 patients, right? Total 14 patients. And for what was the duration of the disease, which stage they are in currently. So this stage was what was diagnosed by the doctor, and then we just did a validation of this for for our model training, and compared it with what the model basically predicted for us, right? So I think I didn't put that slide, but the data was from 14 patients, and for each one of them we had 50 clips, right? So 50 into 14 was the size of video clips that we worked on for this particular data set procurement. Okay. This is a sample visual cue for data collection. So this is just a second. This is visual cue. So that means the patient was basically showed, patients were shown this particular video, and they were told to smile like this girl is smiling, right? So a normal person will smile like this, okay? And the patient will smile like this, right? So you understood the flow, the smoothness of this smile, a normal person smile, and the smile of the patient, right? Likewise, let me just go sample. So for audio collection, so this lady has been asked, we have covered her face because this is the real data that we have. So from you understand, from ethics perspective, her face is covered, but she was basically asked to say baby hippopotamus. So her the voice sample, baby hippopotamus. So this is audio sample of the voice that we captured. So you understand, for capturing the data set also we have to have a decorum, that what are we, and in fact in the ethics committee we have to write everything, that this will be the undertaking, this will be the word that will be asked to the patient, this is the kind of question that we will ask. उनको स्माइल कराना है तो क्या दिखा के हमें स्माइल कराना है, कितना स्माइल कराना है, ताकि उनके ऊपर कोई भी जबरदस्ती ना हो, right? And there is no misbehavior with the patient. So everything has to be mentioned as a part of the ethics committee agreement. This is the video and audio data that was collected from the patients, right? So these are patients, then total basic experiences, 21 videos of patient P1, then 25 of P2, 25 of P2. So total we had 369 video samples, and for each of the expressions how many samples are there, right? So this is categorization of the sample that was collected. This is the ground truth generation procedure, right? Then peak expression videos. So based on that, this is just a distribution of the type of videos that we had, basically to check the homogeneity in the data set that we have used for training our model, right? So there is a lot of data pre-processing that goes behind developing systems like this. Okay, this is the ground truth for happy and sad emotion, three level videos of PWP. So perception of high happy means very happy basically. Then this is medium happy, perception of low happy. So so the data that was fed, that means these video samples which was fed to the model, based on that this is the prognostics that we got. right? So perception of high intensity sad emotion imitation, perception of medium intensity imitation. This is perception of low intensity sad emotion imitation, right? So you understand. So this plot that you are seeing is basically showing medium and low level intensity emotions were easily recognized by the system, then high level emotion, right? So that was the sensitivity of the ground truth or sensitivity of the model on the ground truth data that was fed to the system, right? And each of these data that was fed, they were basically video samples. So doing model processing or model development on that data was basically a very laborious task in terms of resource identification, right? So I think you can just spend some time and look at these graphs to understand the perception, right? I will just be quiet for some time so that you can look at this and make some observation, and then we will continue with the rest of the discussions. Just look at each of the graph and try to just come up with a perception. Okay, so this is patient's inability to imitate happy, sad was highest, fear was lowest. And so basically what we had done in this process is that we also decided on what we are asking going to ask the patient to do. For example, showing very happy, so we showed them a clip where the person is very happy and they were asked to show expression like that, right? So based on that, our observation was that the patient's ability to imitate fear was lowest, and their ability to imitate the other two extreme emotions like happy and sad was highest, because they were extreme emotions, which means that they imitating some normal or average emotion was slightly actually did not make any difference, because the facial expression itself was neutral. So when you are asking them to imitate a neutral expression, so model could not figure out much changes, right? And also because the last two observation that you see, the model had difficulty identifying fear, right? And in most of the cases fear was confused with disgust and happy emotion, right? Likewise, this is happy and sad emotion, three level videos of PWP, and categorization of the expression like that. Then this is the model that we used for peak expression detection, right? So pre-process all the frames and get the facial images, and basically extract the frame features, compute the feature difference, select the peak expression frame as frame with maximum feature difference, and then basically return the peak expression frame. And And in fact, peak expression detection was something that helped us to basically understand the capability of that person in terms of showing a gesture, right? And then relating that to the UPDRS scale, and then coming up with a concept by which we could validate on the progression or the stage of the disease that the person is currently. Okay. Then so these are some of the analysis that was done on the collected data. One of them was mask phase detection, which was after correlation with the UPDRS scale. Then emotion detection and emotion grader, which was basically developed in terms of correlation with the rating data set that we had. Then we also validated the concept that PWP was had less expressivity, and then we worked towards predicting the class of severity based on facial expressions and predicting the class of severity based on the audio speech of the patient, right? And the scale that you are seeing on the right hand side, this is the UPDRS scale. This was basically used for validating the observation or the outcome of the model. Right. So this is the module for mask phase detection, right? Where we basically used a combination of convolutional neural network with max pooling, applying different kinds of activation function and different types of dropouts on different layers, right? And based on this, the normal video peak frame was 82.5% accuracy, and for the patient's first frame the accuracy was 81%, and the patient's peak frame the accuracy was 86. That means the model was good at identifying the peak expression. Now I think I already described what is the peak expression. So very happy, so very happy में कहाँ तक आपका lips move करेगा, right? So that is your peak expression. So basically the model was good at identifying peak expression as compared to average changes in the expression, right? Then this is emotion detection module B framework, where we basically used something called a committee CNN. So committee network is basically using a group of CNNs together for classification purpose, right? So details of this I won't be discussing, it will become complicated, but I wanted to just show the feasibility of the work that was done, right? Then performance of module B on the available data sets. So basically comparing the outcome of CN. These are different kinds of convolution, 3 different kinds of convolutional neural network that was designed for this particular project, and what is the efficiency of each of these networks for identifying different expressions, right? So for example, for surprise, CNN3 did not give higher accuracy, and rather CNN2 and CNN1 gave higher accuracy, right? And so on and so forth. So comparative overall analysis for the individual committee member and combined decision of committee on the test images of available database is what you see over here, right? So basically the average decision of, see what happens in committee network is that uh, whatever is the performance of network 1, network 2, network 3, your overall decision depends upon the average of the decision capability of these three networks, right? So that is how you try to normalize the overall outcome. So overall accuracy, if you see, CNN3 gave us almost 84% accuracy, CNN2 gave 86% accuracy, CNN1 88% accuracy. So on an average, the average decision of the average accuracy of the model was around 89.51 in terms of identifying these 7 basic emotions and then comparing it with the biomarker. So basically I think I made this point clear that we had to we had to work with a combination of three different modular structures. Uh, one was mostly with respect to identifying the emotion, and the second one was comparing it against biomarker, and the third one was making a conclusion based on that, right? And this slide that you see is correlation with the rating scores, right? So here correlation of module B with rating for peak expression. So again, if you want, you can just take a closer look at this particular analysis. So for SAD, 6% success in identifying sad expression, 21%, 21% happy, then angry 7%, disgust was 45%, and likewise for each one of them. So this is rating for peak expression, right? And likewise we can conclude that peak expression rating for angry or disgust in this case, so different cases, right? And that is why uh, 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 it was like analyzing each of these emotions locally, and then doing a average analysis of the model's capacity to identify different emotions, right? Okay, then we also had to use some kind of data augmentation to increase the size of the data, or to increase the type of data or volume of data that we are working with. And for that we used a variety of other techniques like random reflection, scaling, rotation, and that sometimes augmentation is also something that helps you in improving the accuracy. Why? Because if you remember, in the first lecture we discussed that data augmentation is one of the technique to reduce overfitting, and overfitting is something which reduces your validation accuracy, right? So your validation loss is high in if your model is overfit. So by using augmentation you can avoid overfitting in your model, right? And yeah, so this basically shows that after augmentation your model's accuracy was 63%, here it's 39%. This is after augmentation on collected video data, normal patient. This is on the Parkinson's patient, what is the efficiency, right? So after augmentation has affected has increased the accuracy, right? So so that particular purpose of the model training was also justified. And module 3 here was basically relating the outcome of module 2 for expression grading, right? And for expression grading, what all things we did, that is basically put up in this particular module. So for expression grading we used conversion of RGB to grayscale of the input image and expression image, then facial detection and cropping, image normalization, and then get so normalize the image, get Euclidean distance from the neutral image and the expression image, right? So basically taking a difference of these two images, so your neutral image acts like a mean image over here, and that you are subtracting from the expression image to see what's the difference in the expression, and then training the classifier from the distances for morphed images of MSFD dataset, right? And again each of these results I am not discussing in detail, but I was just trying to discuss some of the aspects which can help you to conclude that why do you need to work with variety of data sets and variety of scenarios in order to work towards peak expression detection, or work towards different kinds of expression detection of Parkinson patient, and then related to different classes of expression, and then basically use that as a concept to predict the severity of the disease. So you can just see the fourth module, that is module D, was basically used to predict the severity of the disease. And the accuracy of disease severity, for that also we have used various algorithms for prediction, and these are the mean accuracy which is provided by the respective algorithms in terms of predicting the severity of the disease. And then the next part, whatever I explained before this, was basically with respect to facial emotion based or facial expression based emotion detection, and comparing it with different kinds of scales to identify severity of the disease. And this part is basically using this is dysaesthesia detection, which is using voice samples for detection in the deterioration of the disease. And here you can see the total number of samples that we worked with was non-dysaesthetic was like 1005 samples, and dysaesthetic was like 1156, these many samples. This is just giving different nomenclature in which these signals were basically sampled, and then running that through the model. So the framework used for dysaesthesia detection was training the audio sample, pre-processing, divide them into audio samples divide this audio sample into 1 second frame, then spectrogram generation, finally feeding this into the training model. Then you are feeding this into the classifier, then doing some kind of classification of the based on the feature that you have extracted from the speech signals. And then this you are using for prediction of dysaesthesia or non-dysaesthesia, and then repeating that process for testing the sample, right? So basically the dysaesthesia detection helps us to identify the deterioration in the speech of the Parkinson's patient, right? And these are some of the subsequent slides. Details of all of them I'm not going through, but some of the and then you can see that for each of the labial sound phrases, the quality was measured to check deterioration in the sound, right? And for some of the other data sets that can be used for this research are, these are all public data sets. Some of them are not public, you need to write to the author to get access to the data set, but at least we have not paid for any of these data sets, right? So these are some links of the data set that was used for the research. These are some of the publications that we have done so far, right? Two other papers are in pipeline, but these are these are all Springer journals, so they are already published. And that's all from my side. So this is my email ID in case you want to write to me, or you have any other queries, or you want to collaborate on similar research, or for any other research related to neurodegenerative diseases, you can write to me. And if you have any questions, you can ask that now.
Ma'am, can I ask a question? My name is
Yeah,
Gitika.
yeah. Yes, Kitty.
Ma'am, though it's a workshop which is very technical, but let me just introduce myself. I'm a research scholar from mass communication, mass media background, okay? And I'm also part of media literacy, where we are doing a lot of things. There's one my only intent to join this FDP that I'm going to learn about AI. Those little technical, but I'm really finding it interesting because I'm also understanding lot many new things. Having said this, I want to ask, it's very technical now. Of course, the whole purpose is for technical people, but for people like us, in media, AI is working really there are particular patterns that we can see AI is working. Of course, the work is also benefiting certain people, and also it's a certain disadvantage also, which is used by some of the parties, like in marketing also we are seeing it. So can you give me can you also suggest a certain tools, where we can do a little impact assessment of artificial intelligence in studies like media or mass communication?
I didn't get I got your point that you want to know that how AI can be used in media and mass communication, but
Yes, yes.
which tool can help you to understand the impact analysis? I don't think, at least I am not aware of a single tool which can help you to do the impact analysis. But
Okay.
I can give you some examples of how AI is being used in media. One is this fake news detection.
Yeah, that I understand. I know all the tools, digital tools available in fake news, and we know about this. So
Okay.
that is like you are manually actually using certain tools to debunk where the fake news is. Okay,
Hmm.
that I understand. But
Yeah.
since the AI is, the network is really great. Okay, the only problem, as per for people who are new and who want to understand AI from the perspective of media, it's very difficult because we don't have much know-how about the technical things. So I was just wondering if we have any tool we can employ to just study more about AI and its impact on, communication, and how they are converting communication, and how they are,
Yeah.
tilting
So
the desired behavior and results. So
right. So Gitika, if I understand properly, you want a know-how of how uh, or if there are some easily accessible AI
yes,
tools which
yes,
you can apply for mass communication rather than going and doing very exhaustive
exactly.
training, model training, right?
Yes,
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 there are multiple UI based systems, and in fact now every company is coming up with a UI based implementation of AI, which means that even if somebody doesn't know Python or TensorFlow or PyTorch, they are able to use AI for their work, right?
okay, okay,
So for example, NVIDIA has a system called Digits, Digits, Digits.
okay, okay.
Uh, right, so Digits is a UI based interface where you don't have to code, right, but you have to just pick the data set, then you have to decide that you want to do it, you want to use classification, or you want to do some prediction or segmentation. I
Okay.
just showed you what kind of thing you can do using computer vision, right? So likewise for natural language processing, like text data also, there are multiple things. For example, recommendation or conversation, making chatbots. Like for NLP there are variety of things.
Yes.
So what you can do is you can configure Digits, and where you will be able to just upload your data set, and you will be given an option of what you can do with that data based on the outcome that you're looking for, right, and accordingly generate the outcome. So
Okay, great.
NVIDIA has a tool called Digits. Then Google, if you have access to Google Cloud environment, then there is something called AutoML.
Auto?
AutoML, AutoML. ML stands for machine learning,
Okay, okay, great. Okay.
right? So
Auto.
so AutoML is name of a, it's a Google cloud based environment, where again you have a drag and drop kind of model training. You don't have to code, but you can select the data set, then you can decide what you want to do with that, then you say okay, train. Now after training you can have your test data set, you can say okay, test. So everything controlled using buttons, that's called. And of course you have to do little bit of scripting, but they are manageable, not very
Okay,
hardcore programming. So
okay.
AutoML is there, AutoKeras is also there.
Auto Keras. Okay,
Yes, AutoKeras is also there.
okay.
And there are some more systems also. At least these three systems I remember very easily. Other systems are also there. If I get to remember them, I will share it with Dr. Dipti, and she can give it to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was indeed a pleasure to listen to you, and the knowledge was quite wonderful. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priyanka ma'am. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah,
Priyanka.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
It
And
was such an
have a
excellent session, ma'am. Seriously, you have covered very small things in such a beautiful way, from overfitting to how it is like the accuracy, and it was such an excellent session. I'm pretty much sure that all the participants have learned so many things from this session, and you have opened so many research areas in front of them that will definitely help them. But ma'am, one question from my side is this Parkinson's disease or it is a disorder?
It's a
Because
disease.
this because disorder is we are already studying the area of autism. It's a disorder. It is right from the birth.
This
But
is a disease which
Parkinson's is
people
a disease.
may, yeah, it's a disease which
Okay.
people may get at any age. It's
Okay.
normally Parkinson affects in the later ages, like after 50 years, after 60 years. Parkinson is normally, it affects in later years of life, but there has been frequent episodes where now this has been setting up in younger generations as well, right? So and it is not just stress related, it is, I think, related to some particular protein structure of human body, right? Which may just evolve because of something. But in general, it has been seen that Parkinson or neurodegenerative disease has started affecting larger population of people now as compared to the previous years. And especially after COVID, like there has been lot of people suffering from neurological
Yes,
issues,
ma'am.
right? Lot of people. So this is a full-fledged disease, and this is like mother of other diseases, like I told you when we were discussing about the symptoms. So that's why smart patient monitoring, and especially if your parent is having Parkinson disease, you can't always afford to sit with them, right? Because ultimately life has to move on. So people are trying to work up systems where the surveillance system in the house can monitor that my dad is not feeling well, or now there is a mood swing, or he's feeling sad from the camera detection systems, although I just didn't mention that. But lot of video analytics is also being used as a care facility for such people. And children can monitor their parents from a distance and see.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Okay, before leaving the session, I would request all the participants to kindly switch on their cameras for the group photograph. Kindly switch on your cameras for a few minutes so that we can take a photograph with
Oh,
our
and
resource person.
sorry, yeah, I got disconnected.
I think no, nobody.
Yeah,
Okay. Kindly switch on your
am
cameras.
I
I think
connected
nobody is
now?
ready to switch on the camera. Yes, ma'am, you are connected. Yeah, Suksham, please
Yes,
take the
we'll take a
photograph.
photograph.
I think nobody is. Kindly switch on your cameras for few seconds only. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you, ma'am.
Okay, break of 1 hour. So let's join back at
Bye
2:30.
bye, take care.
Very nice presentation, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.